Captain Jake Morrison stood at the helm of his ship, eyes locked on the baffling data scrolling across his display. The UEES Horizon, a vessel designed for deep space exploration far beyond Earth, had stumbled upon what was initially assumed to be just another drifting planet. But this object, floating alone in the Kepler 442 system without orbiting a sun, defied every known law. It was immense, nearly Earth's size and motionless, yet somehow active. At first glance, it looked like a rogue world expelled from its solar cradle eons ago. But now the data coming in was bizarre and deeply unsettling. Jake turned toward his science officer, calling her name with urgency. Commander Lisa Park, the brightest scientific mind aboard, had been glued to her station. For over 3 hours, her hands trembled as she typed, fear in every movement. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wide, voice barely a whisper but loud with dread. She said the electromagnetic signatures weren't natural, nothing like she'd encountered. The object wasn't rock or ice. It was built of metals and compounds their sensors couldn't even classify. The sphere loomed in space like some dormant titan, its surface lined with bizarre shifting geometries. Metallic veins stretched across its skin. Cavernous openings resembling docking ports were large enough to house entire cities. Chief Engineer Danny Rodriguez emerged from the lower decks, visibly shaken. He had been checking their systems, running diagnostics. But what he found chilled him, and he told Jake that he had tried calculating the energy being emitted. The numbers were beyond comprehension off the scale. This wasn't just a vessel. It was a mobile fortress, its internal power capable of erasing an entire solar system. Jake felt a pit open in his stomach. This wasn't a dead world. It was a machine, constructed by an intelligence so advanced it made human science look primitive. The bridge fell into stunned silence, each crew member realizing they were staring at a force that could annihilate their species in an instant. As if it had sensed their gaze, the object came alive. Lights flared across its surface, in fluid patterns, rippling like waves. Segments of its skin shifted, rotating to reveal deeper mechanical layers. Vast ports opened, no longer just docking bays but massive weapon silos, capable of firing payloads that could dwarf Earth's entire nuclear arsenal. Jake shouted for immediate withdrawal. The Horizon's engines roared, turning them away from the titanic sphere. But before they could flee, a beam lashed out, an invisible force that ensnared their ship. It yanked them backward effortlessly, rendering their thrust useless. Despite their full engine output, they were caught like a toy in a giant's grip. Danny ran another diagnostic and confirmed maximum power was engaged, but it didn't matter. They were being pulled toward one of the smaller openings, though. Even that was large enough to engulf a city. Lisa worked frantically, launching countermeasures, running overrides. Nothing helped. The object's tech was simply too superior. Trying to escape it was like throwing stones at a starship. As they neared the surface, Jake saw details he hadn't before. The hull was inscribed with glyphs that seemed to twist reality when stared at too long. Beneath the metal, light shifted, like some awareness lived within the machine. Smaller vessels patrolled its skin, each one bigger than any ship humanity had yet constructed. The eye they approached irised open, revealing an internal space so vast clouds had formed. Towering structures clearly not made for human. Scale loomed within. They passed through a shimmering barrier and suddenly, sound returned. The air inside was dense, breathable, but alien in feel and flavor. Jake ordered the crew to brace. Friend or foe, something awaited. He couldn't tell whether they were guests or prisoners. What he did know was that this discovery would rewrite everything Earth thought it knew. As their ship descended onto a rising platform, Jake stared at the monolithic surroundings. The architecture dwarfed them. Whoever built this place did so on a godlike scale. As clamps locked the ship in place, Jake understood they weren't leaving. Not yet. The entity behind this construct had chosen to keep them. Jake rallied his officers and prepared to face whatever emerged. He had no way of knowing this would become the defining trial of humanity's existence. and that the fate of every human being depended on the choices made in the coming hours. The massive doorway ahead began to the docking bay sealed shut. Behind their vessel, with a thunderous boom that rolled like storms across distant cliffs, Jake Morrison felt the floor shudder beneath his boots as the massive atmospheric processors activated, flooding the cavernous space with air. The low, vibrating hum made his chest tremble and sent sharp aches through his teeth. A decision had to be made. Who would step outside and confront whatever intelligence had brought them here? Jake selected the 3 officers he trusted most. Commander Lisa Park for her expertise in alien sciences, Chief Engineer Danny Rodriguez for his unmatched knowledge of tech, and Lieutenant Amy Carter, their top security specialist, in case things went badly. They all suited up in full environmental armors just in case the air wasn't safe. The suits held 6 hours of oxygen and were reinforced to resist light weaponry. Jake hoped the armor would remain unused, but he'd learned the hard way. Never gamble with the unknown. The team of 4 moved to the ship's main airlock. Jake activated the outer seal, and with a hydraulic hiss, the door slid open. What lay beyond stole their breath. They stood at the mouth of a chamber so vast that its far walls were hidden in shadow. The ceiling arched so high that it vanished into pitch black. The surroundings were both wondrous and unnerving, an alien blend of art and menace. Were crafted from strange metals that didn't reflect light, but twisted it into eerie prismatic shades. Towering, curved supports reached upward like the bones of a slumbering titan. The entire space was constructed for giants, leaving Jake and his crew feeling like tiny intruders in a sacred hall meant for titanic beings. They stepped from their ship and began to move carefully across the docking bay floor. Each footfall echoed hauntingly through the emptiness, reflecting off distant surfaces in layered, delayed waves. The floor beneath them was smooth and unexpectedly warm, pulsing faintly, with a light that glowed not from the surface, but from deep within the alloyed structure. As they ventured deeper into the enormous chamber, Jake spotted other ships far away, docked at massive platforms. These vessels were monstrous wharfing skyscrapers back on Earth. Each bore bizarre designs unfamiliar to human eyes. Some looked like jagged spines, others like perfect orbs. None of them followed human engineering principles, but all shared the same fluid, living aesthetic as the docking chamber. Without warning, a voice rang out, not from a speaker or location, but from the very air itself. It was deep and resonant, like wind moving, whistling through ancient trees. It spoke fluent English, which caught Jake off guard. He hadn't imagined these beings would know the human tongue. The voice greeted them and referred to them as small ones. It said their arrival had been foretold, that their kind had long been expected. A shiver went through Jake's spine. Someone or something had known that humans would eventually come. A shape began to form ahead of them, first just a shimmer in the thick air, then gradually taking solid form. The entity that emerged was tall and elegant, nearly 10 feet in height. Its appearance resembled a human, but its form was flawless, as though crafted by a divine hand. It had flowing silver hair that drifted as though it were suspended in water. Despite the breathable air, its eyes were black and deep, filled with glimmering pinpoints of starlight. Its skin gave off a subtle glow, as though lit from within. When it moved, it did so with effortless grace, as if every gesture had been choreographed. After a moment, it spoke its name, Keeper Valdris of the Eternal Fleet. Jake stepped forward, forcing confidence into his posture, even though he felt dwarfed by the being, introduced himself, his crew, and asked why they had been brought here. Valdris explained that any species that reached a certain technological milestone would eventually encounter one of their ships. That moment would signal the beginning of what he called a trial phase. Jake's stomach turned. He asked what kind of trial this would be. The Keeper answered, "All intelligent life must prove its worthiness before joining the wider galactic order." Success meant freedom among the stars. Failure meant a reassignment to more appropriate roles. The weight of that word chilled Jake. Lisa Park, still stunned, found her voice. Her curiosity overcame her fear, and she asked how many such ships were scattered throughout the stars. Jake held his breath, bracing for the answer. Valdris smiled an expression both beautiful and unnerving. He said this ship was but one of 10,000. Each carried billions of their kind and served as mobile fortresses and homes. They called themselves the Architects and had guided galactic evolution for more than 1,000,000 years. Amy Carter's fingers brushed against her weapon instinctively, though she knew it was worthless. Still, she asked what would happen if humanity refused the trial. Valdris raised one hand, and suddenly holograms surrounded them. They saw planets where technology had been dismantled piece by piece. Cities once filled with light had become stone villages. Starships shattered, their crews returned to primitive life. The inhabitants looked lost, stripped of memory, unaware of what they once had. Refusal, Valdris said, was not an option. Humanity would be tested. Their actions in the days ahead would determine their place. Success meant freedom. Failure meant managed existence like those shown in the holograms. Jake's pulse thundered in his ears as the enormity hit him. This wasn't about one ship, it was about humanity itself. If they failed, everything their species had built would be erased. Valdris told them they would return to their vessel and could make contact with Earth. The first trial would commence one day after their return. Jake wanted to demand answers, but the Keeper was already dissolving like mist at dawn. Silently, the 4 humans made their way back to the ship. Their minds reeled with what they had just learned. Jake understood the message they carried home would append everything. The moment Captain Jake Morrison and his crew sent their report, it spread like a spark in dry grass. Within 6 hours, every major nation on Earth knew the truth. Humanity was no longer alone. And more importantly, those they had met were not explorers or diplomats. They were judges who would determine the species' future. President Richard Hayes called for sat around a vast table lined with screens and communication arrays. The tension in the underground chamber was palpable as world leaders and experts tried to grasp the scale of what confronted them. Admiral Kelly Stevens stood at the table's head, delivering her briefing with a steady voice, though her eyes betrayed the fear behind her words. She outlined what their deep space monitoring systems had uncovered, the giant vessel captain Morrison had encountered. It wasn't alone. Their sensors had identified 999 more planet-sized ships spread out across the galaxy. 4 years. These massive constructs had posed as drifting planets or massive asteroids ignored by science, as cosmic oddities. Now, every single one of them had begun to activate. Lights pulsed across their surfaces. Energy levels were spiking. Something had triggered them. Something humanity had done had awakened an ancient fleet. Dr. Nathan Brooks joined the emergency meeting via hologram from his lunar research station. He had been analyzing every scrap of data about the entities calling themselves the Architects. His conclusions were grim and humbling. Nathan explained that the being known as Valdris had spoken clearly. Humanity was to be tested. The tests would be structured as challenges, each one more complex and morally difficult than the last, crafted by the Architects. But no one knew what the trials would entail or what standard was required to pass. The first test came exactly 24 hours. After contact with Valdris, a new anomaly was detected, an object moving rapidly toward Earth. At first, analysts believed it was a comet or asteroid, but as it drew closer, the truth became clear. It was artificial, made of the same alien alloy as the Architect vessels. It was roughly mountain-sized and heading straight for Earth. Projections showed it would cause apocalyptic destruction. Cities would vanish. Dust clouds would choke the sky for years. But it wasn't simply a doomsday weapon. This was a test one, of horrifying design. With the object came a message broadcast across all human channels, and it shook the world. Humanity could stop the impact. The Architects would supply the means, but to save Earth, they would need to redirect the object to collide with Mars. Over 2 million people lived there. The choice was brutal and clear. Save Earth by sacrificing the Martian colony. The tools to do so were ready, but must be used within 48 hours. From within the alien ship, Captain Morrison and his crew watched in agony. Surveillance feeds from Earth and Mars filled the chamber. and Morrison's fists clenched as he saw his people wrestle with an impossible moral dilemma. He confronted Valdris, demanding to know why such cruelty was part of the test. The Keeper listened calmly. Then, with chilling detachment, explained that such choices defined leadership in the galactic realm. Civilization's future depended on hard decisions. How humanity reacted would shape their place among the stars. Those who sacrificed others for self-preservation were assigned a different status than those who sought better answers. Back on Earth, Admiral Stevens convened the planet's best minds, military leaders. Scientists, philosophers, engineers, in a desperate effort to outwit the trap. The challenge: save everyone. Colonel Ryan Phillips, renowned for his heroics, during the Jupiter Station disaster, proposed a radical alternative. Instead of choosing between Earth and Mars, humanity would fight for both. A third path, one the architects hadn't accounted for. The plan was bold, near impossible. But it was their only chance. It demanded total coordination in every available technological asset humanity possessed. The asteroid would be redirected not with architect tools, but with human ingenuity. From deep within the alien vessel, Chief Engineer Danny Rodriguez shared schematics and insights into architect systems. Humanity's top engineers and physicists worked without pause, pushing science to its limits. The plan was to orchestrate a chain of synchronized nuclear detonations along the asteroid's projected path, combined with the thrust of every ship, drone, and satellite humanity could launch. Together, they would end Mars. The plan was riddled with potential points of failure, and most experts involved doubted it would succeed. Everything hinged on millisecond-level timing. A single miscalculation would doom the entire mission. Even under ideal conditions, their simulations gave them less than a 15% chance of success. President Hayes scanned the war room, locking eyes with the men and women who now had to decide humanity's future. Everyone knew the stakes. If they failed, both planets would be annihilated. But choosing the architect's path meant dooming. Millions to save billions. Colonel Phillips rose, his presence commanding the room. With the voice that had inspired countless crews before, he reminded them, humanity had never accepted impossible odds without a fight. Time and time again, humans had survived what should have ended them. This was just one more impossible challenge. Then they would meet it head-on. So the decision was made. They would defy the architects and attempt the unthinkable. Emergency. Signals went out to every human outpost across the system, requesting volunteers for a mission that might very well kill them all. The response was staggering. Millions offered their skills and lives to support a plan that could either save everything or end it all. The chosen plan was so complex, so risky, that even its architects struggled to believe it could be pulled off. Rather than accept the architect's binary choice, humanity would fight to protect both Earth and Mars. Their weapon would be ingenuity. The asteroid would be deflected using every available system and vessel in humanity's reach in a synchronized ballet of technology. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who led the physics division at Geneva's top space research center, was placed in charge of the orbital mechanics and impact vectors. She'd spent her life studying cosmic trajectories. Now she worked around the clock 36 hours without pause, mapping out the exact coordinates and time sequences the operation required. Her final models were so precise that even a microsecond's deviation could cause catastrophe. Sarah's solution demanded nuclear blasts triggered at exact intervals along the asteroid's route. Simultaneously, every ship, satellite, and station in the system had to fire their engines in perfect unison. If executed flawlessly, the asteroid's course would bend into the sun, vaporizing harmlessly. But the margin for error was so narrow it barely existed at all. The precision required was staggering. Every detonation and every thruster ignition had to occur at the exact moment. Accurate down 2 milliseconds. Worse still, much of humanity's orbital infrastructure would need to be sacrificed to generate the force needed to move such an enormous mass. President Hayes called his final council meeting before the attempt commenced. The pressure bearing down on him was suffocating. If this failed, he would have helped doom Earth and Mars. Billions of lives were riding on this gamble. As he looked at the engineers, generals, and scientists surrounding him, he saw the fear etched on their faces, but more than that, he saw courage. These were the people who defined humanity's greatness, willing to risk everything rather than accept a hopeless binary. Colonel Phillips, now leading the military coordination, stood with the same iron resolve that had earned him respect across every command. Addressing the room, he reminded them of history. Humans had never walked away from impossible odds. They had endured, adapted, and prevailed in the face of annihilation. The colonel emphasized that the architects had tried to corner them into choosing destruction or betrayal, but humanity had refused both. Instead, they were pushing back against a test meant to crush their hope, to make them surrender to inevitability. That refusal was what made them unique. Unlike every other species subjected to this cruel trial, humans weren't accepting defeat. We're rewriting the rules. Orders went out to every corner of humanity's domain. The asteroid was now just 18 hours from impact. There was no time left for adjustments. Either everything would succeed or they would be dust in space. Captain Lisa Park. Now the central liaison between Earth and the alien craft, where Captain Morrison's team remained held, began transmitting the final instructions. Her tone over the channel was steady and efficient, but beneath it, every listener could sense the terror she fought to conceal. On Mars, 2 million colonists watched the skies, awaiting judgment. Many had stepped forward, using terraforming machines to provide thrust from the planet's surface. They knew that if the plan failed, they'd be the first to perish, obliterated in minutes. Meanwhile, Keeper Valdris observed with mounting curiosity. In his countless years overseeing these trials, no species had ever rejected the framework outright. Civilizations usually chose to survive selfishly or die selflessly, but humanity was breaking the mold. They were trying to save everyone. Valdris turned to Morrison as they monitored the spiraling activity across the system. The Keeper admitted he was deeply intrigued by what humans were doing. Never, in 50,000 attempts, had a race dared defy the rules so boldly. Morrison's heart swelled with pride, though fear still clung to him. His people were either about to make history or become a tragic footnote. But this, he realized, was quintessentially human. Given an impossible choice, they would invent a third option and dare the universe to stop them. How came the reckoning? The asteroid entered the final approach. There would be no second chances. Across the solar system, humanity held its breath. Detonations erupted in flawless order, Earth-launched nukes, creating calculated shockwaves at exact points along the asteroid's arc. The explosions rippled with perfect precision, nudging the massive object just slightly off its trajectory. In the same instant, hundreds of spacecraft engaged their thrusters in tight formation, adding directional force of thrust to redirect the asteroid. Ion drives from old interstellar probes, chemical boosters from aging freighters, and even Mars's colossal terraforming thrusters all fired in synchronized bursts. Earth's and Mars's orbital stations used their maneuvering systems to contribute. Knowing they'd drift off course for 17 nerve-wracking minutes, two worlds now dangled on the edge of survival. Humanity had launched its final strike. All across the system, screens lit up with live trajectory models. Shifting by the second, as thousands of inputs slowly began nudging the asteroid, engineers and scientists stared, breath held. As their data confirmed the unbelievable, the object's path was changing fractionally at first, but undeniably. Together, the detonations and thousands of propulsion sources were successfully shifting its course toward the sun. Dr. Mitchell blinked at her displays, stunned. The updated flight vector was irrefutable. Humanity had just done what should have been impossible. The asteroid would now bypass Earth and Mars, its final destination, the solar inferno. Valdris stood quietly as the outcome unfolded before him. Then laughter, strange and melodic like wind chimes, echoing inside a storm, rose from the alien commander. Speaking to Morrison, he admitted that in a million years of running these trials, never had a species managed such a feat. The asteroid's redirection triggered massive celebrations system-wide. But for those who had orchestrated it, the victory carried deeper weight. Humanity had passed the test, not by complying, but by defying its very premise. And now, they waited. What would the architects do next? Would their defiance lead to salvation or provoke even harder trials? The redirection of the asteroid was not the end. It was only the first chapter in a saga no one yet understood. News of humanity's third path, neither self-sacrifice nor selfish. Survival spread through the architect fleet faster than data streams could be traced. For the first time in a million years of judgment, the keepers questioned the foundation of their own trials. Valdris stood alone in his chamber aboard the enormous planetary vessel, studying reports flooding in from galactic watchers. From every corner of their empire, from each of the 10,000 keeper craft, the same message came in. Humanity had done what no species had ever dared. They'd been presented with a moral dilemma built to expose values instead of choosing. They'd rewritten the scenario. It shook the keepers to their core. If other species realized these tests weren't absolute, that their paths could be resisted, the very structure of cosmic civilization might collapse. Thousands of worlds, long ranked and categorized based on compliance, might suddenly begin to question the judgments imposed upon them. Valdris activated the ancient priority communication network that linked all 10,000 keepers. Within hours, the most massive convergence of architect vessels in history was underway. Between galaxies, a silent storm of planet-sized ships gathered, their colossal forms shimmering through interstellar voids like titanic machines. Inside each world-sized ship were billions who had devoted their existence to overseeing, guiding, and measuring younger races. Then came the summons. Captain Morrison and his team were brought before this monumental congregation. The human delegation stepped into a chamber so enormous it could have housed Earth's moon, with vastness to spare. All around them,